The NBC studio at 30 Rockefeller Plaza was usually a place of controlled chaos, producers rushing with headsets, makeup artists dabbing powder on foreheads, and the low hum of anxiety that precedes a national broadcast. But tonight, the atmosphere was different. It was heavy. The debate stage was set with the stark minimalism of modern political theater. Two podiums, blue backlighting, and a moderator's desk centered like a judge's bench. The contenders represented the two most distinct poles of American populism. On the left, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, the firebrand of the Bronx, the queen of social media, and the face of the progressive movement. On the right, Senator J.D. Vance, the author-turned-politician, the Marine veteran, and the intellectual spearhead of the new conservative right. The moment J.D. Vance walked onto that NBC stage, the room felt the shift. He didn't wave to the crowd. He didn't smile for the cameras. He walked with a quiet, grounded solidity, wearing a simple dark suit. He carried no stacks of binders, no pre-written placards. He carried only a single, small, worn leather folder. He placed it on the podium with a soft thud, folded his hands, and waited. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered moments later. The energy changed instantly. She was bright, kinetic, and radiating readiness. She waved to the studio audience, flashed her trademark wide smile, and adjusted her microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had spent the last 6 years living in front of a lens. She looked confident, not just prepared, but eager. She had come for a show. She assumed Vance had come for a speech. She was wrong. He had come for a reckoning. The moderator, Lester Holt, looked from one candidate to the other, sensing the voltage in the air. "Good evening," he said, his voice practicing its usual measured neutrality. "Tonight, we discuss America's economic future." Cameras zoomed in. The nation leaned closer. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," Holt began, "you have the opening statement." AOC didn't need notes. She spoke with rhythm, passion, and the specific cadence that had made her a viral sensation. "I grew up in a working-class family," she began, her eyes engaging the camera lens directly. "I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to count tips to pay rent. We are living in a system rigged by billionaires, for billionaires, while working families are left to fight for scraps. Tonight, we are going to talk about a Green New Deal, about dignity, and about taking back our power." The audience clapped. It was a good opening. It hit every buzzword. It was emotional, sweeping, and visually compelling. When she finished, the camera shifted to Vance. He didn't applaud. He didn't smile. He looked at her with a flat, unreadable expression. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," Vance began, his voice dropping an octave lower than hers, devoid of theatricality. That was a passionate statement. Truly. But passion doesn't replace policy. Emotion doesn't substitute for economics. And Twitter followers don't translate into results. The air in the room changed instantly. The applause died in the throats of the audience. Vance rested a hand on his leather folder. "You talk about poverty," he said softly. "I lived it. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. My mom was addicted to drugs. I didn't have a safety net. I joined the Marines to escape poverty because it was the only way out. I went to Yale Law, not because I had connections, but because I clawed my way there. I worked, I built, and I served." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I didn't post about it on Instagram. I lived it." AOC shifted slightly, her shoulders tightening. The smile flickered. "You say you fight for working people?" Vance continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But what you've done, your policies, your decisions, your votes, have hurt them. Tonight, we're not going to talk about slogans. We're going to go through your record, one piece at a time." Lester Holt tried to intervene, sensing the aggression. "Let's keep the discussion focused on policy, Senator Vance." Vance looked at him. "It is policy, Lester." He opened the leather folder. Inside, there were no speeches. There were printed pages, tabbed with color-coded markers, highlighted and organized with forensic precision. "Everything I'm about to say comes from her record," Vance said. "Public record?" AOC's voice broke the silence. "If we're here to talk about the economy, then let's talk about solutions, not personal attacks. You can make fun of my background, Senator, but people know what I stand for." Vance's reply was calm, surgical. "They know what you stand for. After tonight, they'll know what you've actually done." Analytical expansion, the ethos of reality versus performance. This opening segment illustrates a clash of ethos. Performative ethos. AOC relies on the ethos of the advocate. Her power comes from her ability to articulate the pain of others and frame herself as their champion. Her working-class backstory is central to her brand, but Vance identifies a weakness. It has been polished into a product. Lived ethos. Vance counters with the ethos of the survivor. By referencing the gritty details of his past, addiction, the Marines, he strips the glamour away from the concept of struggle. He positions himself not as a voice for the poor, but as a graduate of poverty. The prop. The worn leather folder is a masterstroke of visual storytelling. In a digital age, paper signifies receipts. It signifies evidence. It suggests that Vance isn't there to debate ideology. He is there to conduct an audit. The physical weight of the folder contrasts with the ephemeral nature of social media fame, setting the stage for a conflict between concrete reality and digital narrative. The tension in the studio had shifted from a political debate to something resembling a courtroom cross-examination. Vance stood with his hand on the open folder. AOC stood with her hands gripping the sides of her podium, her knuckles slightly white. "Perfect," Vance said. "Then let's start with the first principle of economics. Math. Something your policies consistently ignore." The audience murmured. This was a direct attack on her competence, a dangerous line to walk. But Vance seemed unbothered by the optics. "Congresswoman," Vance began, looking down at the first document in his folder. "You graduated from Boston University in 2011 with a degree in economics and international relations, correct?" AOC nodded, relieved to be on factual ground. "That's right. Cum laude." Vance gave a thin, humorless smile. "Good, because tonight we're going to see what that degree actually taught you." He lifted a single sheet of paper. "You often talk about economic justice, the working class, and billionaires. You speak with the authority of an academic. But let me ask you, when was the last time you used your degree for actual economic work? Did you ever analyze data for a firm? Did you build a financial model? Did you work as an economist, or a financial analyst, or a policy researcher?" AOC frowned. "I have used my degree every day in Congress. Economics is about people. It's about understanding how systems affect human lives. It isn't just spreadsheets." "It's about Twitter followers," Vance interrupted lightly, earning a nervous ripple of laughter from the crowd. "Because I checked your resume, Congresswoman. After graduating in 2011, you didn't work in any economics-related field. You worked in the service industry. You bartended." AOC's eyes narrowed. "That's honest work, and I respect it. Are you saying that working-class jobs disqualify someone from understanding the economy? That is exactly the elitist attitude that—" "Not at all," Vance cut in, his voice level. "I respect honest work. My family did it. I did it. But I am saying that pouring drinks does not make you an expert on monetary policy. And pretending that a bachelor's degree you never used qualifies you to rewrite the entire American economy is dangerous. Lester Holt stepped in. Let's stay on policy, gentlemen. Senator, please get to the point. Vance ignored him, his eyes locked on Ocasio-Cortez. The point is competence. The point is the difference between theory and practice. You speak about economics like a theologian speaks about religion, Vance said. You deal in moral absolutes. Billionaires are bad. Capitalism is evil. Green energy is salvation. But an economist deals in trade-offs. An economist deals in scarcity. An economist deals in math. And your math, Vance said, tapping the folder, does not add up. AOC leaned into her microphone. You are trying to gatekeep economics, Senator. You think because I didn't work at a hedge fund like your friends, I don't understand money? I understand that the current system is crushing people. I understand that you have credentials, Vance countered, but I have experience. There is a difference. I went to business school. I worked in venture capital. I understand how capital formation actually works, not in a textbook, but in the real world. I know what makes a business hire someone, and I know what makes them fire someone. You have a piece of paper from Boston University, Vance said, and you have used it to justify policies that would bankrupt this nation. The audience was silent. The attack on her background was sharp, but it was serving a specific purpose. Vance was stripping away her authority. He was arguing that her entire political persona was built on a foundation of unearned expertise. So, Vance said, flipping the page in his folder, let's test your economic literacy. Let's look at your signature proposal, the one that made you famous. The Green New Deal. Analytical expansion. Credentialism versus competence. This section explores the expertise trap in modern politics. The credential shield, AOC often uses her degree in economics as a shield against criticism that her policies are unrealistic. By citing her degree, she claims the mantle of an expert. The application gap. Vance attacks this shield by highlighting the lack of practical application. He argues that a degree without professional experience is merely academic theory. By contrasting her postgraduate career, bartending, with the complexity of the system she wants to overhaul, he suggests a dangerous gap between her confidence and her capability. Theory versus reality. Vance frames the debate as a conflict between theological economics, moral assertions about what should be, and practical economics, mathematical assertions about what is. He positions himself as the realist protecting the economy from a theorist who doesn't understand the machinery she is trying to operate. Let's take your Green New Deal, Vance said. He pulled out a document filled with graphs and citations. When you introduced this, you called it a wartime mobilization to save the planet. You released a FAQ sheet that promised guaranteed jobs, universal health care, retrofitting every building in America, and a high-speed rail network that would make air travel obsolete. Vance looked up. Estimated cost, depending on the study, between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. He let the number hang in the air. $93 trillion. Congresswoman, Vance said, the total federal revenue, the total amount of taxes collected from every American and every business, is projected to be about $45 trillion over that same period. That is basic arithmetic. How do you spend 93 when you only collect 45? The audience erupted with gasps and whispers. The sheer scale of the numbers was staggering. AOC straightened, her face flushing slightly. Those estimates are exaggerated by conservative think tanks who want to protect the fossil fuel industry. They are worst-case scenarios. I'm quoting the American Action Forum, Vance countered. But I'm also quoting the Congressional Budget Office on the component parts. But let's ignore the conservatives, Vance said, flipping a page. Let's listen to your allies. Larry Summers, Vance read. Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary. Barack Obama's economic advisor. He called your plan not serious policy. Paul Krugman, Vance continued. Nobel Prize winner. Columnist for the New York Times. A man who loves government spending. Even he said your plan's timeline was not realistic. These are liberals, Congresswoman. These are the people who want to agree with you. And even they can't make the math work. AOC blinked, caught off guard. She was used to debating Republicans who denied climate change. She wasn't used to debating a Republican who used liberal economists to dismantle her budget. We need transformative policy, not incremental change, AOC shouted, her voice rising. The cost of doing nothing is higher. The planet is burning. You are talking about accounting errors while the world is on fire. You can't fix the climate with math that doesn't work, Vance said, his tone firm but measured. That is the difference between us. When I write about economics, I cite data. I run numbers. You cite feelings. That might trend online, Vance added. But it doesn't pay bills. The audience applauded softly again. It wasn't raucous. It was the sound of realization. You had every chance to apply your degree, Vance said, leaning forward. And instead, you turned it into theater. You propose multi-trillion-dollar policies that ignore basic economics. You promised jobs that disappear, budgets that don't balance, and outcomes that can't exist. This isn't just about money, Vance said. It's about seriousness. If you go to a bank and ask for a loan for a house, and your budget is based on manifesting the money, they laugh you out of the building. But you went to the American taxpayer with a $93 trillion bill and called it moral leadership. AOC tried to recover. The Green New Deal is a vision document. It sets the destination. We work out the details as we go. You don't start a journey to the moon without knowing if you have enough fuel to get there, Vance shot back. That isn't vision. That is a suicide mission. If your economics degree didn't teach you the difference between aspiration and arithmetic, maybe the real issue isn't the economy. Vance closed that section of the folder. It's credibility. Analytical expansion. The serious versus unserious frame. This section analyzes how Vance dismantles the moral high ground. The arithmetic trap. Vance refuses to debate the morality of climate change. Is it bad? Instead, he debates the viability of the solution. Can we pay for it? By focusing on the $93 trillion versus the $45 trillion gap, he turns the debate into a simple math problem that AOC cannot solve. The liberal witness. Citing Larry Summers and Paul Krugman is a strategic masterstroke. It insulates Vance from claims of partisan bias. If he cited the Heritage Foundation, AOC could dismiss it. By citing Obama's advisors, he proves that her policies are radical even within the Democratic establishment. Vision versus hallucination. Vance reframes visionary politics as unserious politics. He argues that true leadership isn't just pointing at a problem, it's engineering a workable solution. By labeling her plan theater, he diminishes her role from a legislator to a performer. Credibility, Vance repeated, letting the word settle. And that brings us to the next tab. He flipped the divider. The label read, Lifestyle. Let's talk about how your actions match your economics. AOC stiffened. She knew what was coming. Vance held up a glossy 8x10 photo. It was the image that had launched 1,000 memes. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the red carpet of the 2021 Met Gala. She was wearing a white off-the-shoulder gown. On the back, painted in bold red letters, was the slogan, Tax the Rich. Let's talk about September 13th, 2021, Vance said calmly. The Met Gala, one of the most exclusive elite events in America. The playground of the 0.01%. Tickets cost up to $35,000. That is a year's income for most of the working families you claim to represent. And there you were, Vance said, tapping the photo. Smiling, posing, sipping champagne. AOC's voice rose. I was invited as a public servant. I didn't pay for the ticket. And I used the platform to send a message to the very people who need to hear it. Tax the rich, Vance read from the dress. You called it a statement, Vance said. But the only statement it made was that you have become the very thing you claim to oppose. He laid the photo flat on the podium. Let's look at the irony, Congresswoman. The designer who made that dress, Aurora James. Did you vet her? Vance asked. AOC hesitated. She is a brilliant black female designer who... She owed over $100,000 in back taxes and unpaid wages to her own workers. Vance interrupted softly. The room erupted. Half gasps, half applause. You wore a tax-the-rich gown, Vance said, savoring the sentence, made by a rich designer who didn't pay her taxes. That isn't just hypocrisy, Vance said. That is farce. AOC's face flushed. I didn't know her financial situation. That was about starting a conversation about wealth inequality. You started a conversation, all right, Vance said. The kind of conversation where Americans asked, how does someone who claims to fight for working people end up partying with billionaires? You stood next to celebrities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You laughed. You posed. You posted it online. Do you know what that looked like to a factory worker in Ohio? Vance asked. It didn't look like resistance. It looked like assimilation. It looked like you wanted to join the club, not burn it down. AOC tried to pivot. If using my platform to challenge power makes people uncomfortable, that's fine with me. I brought the message into the belly of the beast. Challenging power? Vance asked, incredulous. You are power. You are a member of the United States Congress. You make $174,000 a year. You are in the top 5% of earners in this country. And you were at a party for the top 0.001%. You called it activism, Vance said. But it looked a lot more like branding. You want to tax the rich? Vance asked. Start by not eating their food, drinking their wine, and wearing their clothes while pretending you hate them. Analytical expansion, the visual paradox. This section analyzes the power of visual hypocrisy. The dress as a symbol. The image of the tax-the-rich dress is the ultimate visual paradox. It embodies the critique of champagne socialism, advocating for the poor while enjoying the luxuries of the rich. Vance uses the photo as an irrefutable artifact of her disconnect. The belly of the beast, fallacy. AOC argues she went undercover to challenge the elite. Vance deconstructs this by revealing she participated in the elitism. By noting the designer's tax evasion, he proves that her activism was superficial. She didn't even check if her partners practiced what she preached. Assimilation. Vance's most damaging charge is that AOC has been seduced. He argues that she hasn't changed the system. The system has changed her. She has traded her bartender roots for Met Gala invites, marking her transition from outsider to insider. But let's move from fashion to finance, Vance said, because the Met Gala was just a party. What I want to talk about next had real consequences for real families. He flipped to the next tab. Amazon HQ2. Let's talk about jobs, Vance said. Because when we strip away all the slogans and speeches, that's what working people actually care about. Can they earn a living? He held up a sheet of paper. 2018. Amazon announced plans for a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. Your district? 25,000 direct jobs. Average salary, $150,000. That is billions in wages over a decade. Construction jobs, tech jobs, service jobs. And what did you do? Vance asked. AOC's shoulders tensed. I opposed corporate welfare. Amazon was demanding $3 billion in tax breaks, money that should have gone to our crumbling schools and our subways. I stood up to the richest man in the world to protect my community. Corporate welfare. Vance repeated the phrase. That is the slogan. But let's look at the math again. Vance walked over to a small whiteboard the producers had set up. He picked up a marker. Amazon wanted $3 billion in incentives, Vance wrote. But those weren't cash handouts. New York wasn't writing Jeff Bezos a check. They were agreeing not to collect taxes on revenue that didn't exist yet. If Amazon didn't come, Vance explained, drawing a zero, New York paid nothing. But it also got nothing. If Amazon came, Vance continued, they projected $27 billion in tax revenue over 20 years. So here is the equation, Vance said, circling the numbers. 27 billion revenue, 3 billion incentives equals 24 billion profit for New York. He turned to AOC. You celebrated saving $3 billion imaginary dollars, while costing your constituents $27 billion in real revenue. And more importantly, Vance said, dropping the marker, you cost them 25,000 jobs. That isn't corporate welfare, Vance said. That is economic illiteracy. AOC's voice sharpened. Amazon exploits workers. They are anti-union. They would have gentrified the neighborhood and pushed working families out. Gentrification? Vance asked. You mean rising property values, better schools, safer streets? You mean the working families who could have had six-figure salaries, who could have paid off their debts? 70% of your constituents supported the project. Vance cited the poll. 70%. They wanted those jobs, Vance said. But you wanted a viral moment. You stopped that from happening, Vance said. You killed the deal. Amazon went to Virginia instead. And those 25,000 jobs? They went with them. Restaurant openings in Long Island City declined. Vance read from a report. Property values dropped. Small businesses that had taken out loans to prepare for the influx of customers went bankrupt. That isn't resistance, Congresswoman, Vance said. That is regression. You celebrated a victory, Vance concluded, but the only thing you defeated was opportunity. Analytical expansion. Opportunity cost. This section introduces the economic concept of opportunity cost to the political debate. The tax break. Myth. Vance dismantles the common misunderstanding of tax incentives. He explains the difference between a handout, giving cash, and a tax break, reducing future liability. By doing the math on the whiteboard, he visualizes the net loss, $24 billion, making the abstract policy error concrete. The savior complex. AOC frames herself as the protector of the community against a corporate predator. Vance reframes her as the obstacle to the community's prosperity. He argues that by trying to save them from Amazon, she condemned them to stagnation. Democratic disconnect. Citing the 70% support statistic is crucial. It proves that AOC was out of step with her own voters. She prioritized her ideological purity, anti-corporate, over their practical desires, jobs. It paints her as an elitist, imposing her values on a community she claims to serve. Opportunity, Vance said, closing the Amazon tab. You denied it to them, but you certainly haven't denied it to yourself. He flipped to the next divider. The label glinted under the lights. Personal lifestyle. Congresswoman, Vance began quietly, you've built your image around being a voice for the poor. You've told the world you understand their struggle. But let's take a look at how you actually live. He held up a printed page of a real estate listing. Navy Yard, Washington, D.C. This is your apartment complex. Monthly rent, $2,800. Amenities, rooftop pool, concierge, fitness center, private lounge, pet spa, Whole Foods in the lobby. Vance looked at the audience. That isn't exactly working-class living, is it? AOC's tone was defiant. I am a member of Congress. I work in D.C. like every other representative. I need housing close to the Capitol. Are you saying I should live in a cardboard box? I'm saying you shouldn't pretend to be poor when you live in luxury, Vance replied. You pay $1,000 more per month than the median rent in your own district in New York. You live in one of the most gentrified, expensive neighborhoods in Washington. That isn't struggle, Vance said. That is status. And then there is the car, Vance said. You drove a Tesla. $60,000. That costs more than most of your constituents make in a year. AOC crossed her arms. Owning an electric vehicle supports clean energy. I am walking the walk on climate change. You are driving the drive of the elite, Vance corrected. You lecture about climate justice from behind the wheel of a luxury car, wearing $1,000 tailored suits, while dining at Michelin-rated restaurants in D.C. That isn't advocacy, Vance said. It's performance. I came from humble beginnings, AOC shouted. My father was an architect. I understand. Your father was an architect? Vance interrupted. You grew up in Westchester County, one of the wealthiest counties in New York? You attended Yorktown High School, one of the best public schools in the state? Vance shook his head. That isn't poverty, Congresswoman. That is comfort. You adopted poverty as a costume. You talk about bartending like it's a badge of honor, Vance said. But for you, it was a choice. It was a gap year. For the people you claim to represent, it is a life sentence. I grew up sharing a room with my sister in my grandparents' house, Vance said softly. I remember counting coins at gas stations to buy groceries because the card was declined. When I made money later in life, Vance said, I didn't forget that feeling. I still live modestly because I know what it's like to have nothing. The contrast hung in the air. Quiet. Heavy. Undeniable. Americans are tired of being preached to by people who claim to fight for the poor while living like the rich, Vance said. They don't want empathy on Instagram. They want honesty in leadership. Analytical expansion. The authenticity gap. This section attacks the relatability core of AOC's brand. The real estate audit. By listing the specific amenities, rooftop pool, pet spa, Vance paints a picture of a yuppie lifestyle that is culturally alien to the working class. It frames AOC not as a woman of the people, but as a standard D.C. elite who enjoys the perks of power. The origin story. Vance challenges her Jenny from the Block narrative. By highlighting her Westchester upbringing and architect father, he reveals that she was always middle class. This suggests her struggle persona is appropriated, stolen valor from the actual poor. The costume metaphor. The line, poverty isn't a costume, is the thematic anchor. Vance argues that for AOC, class struggle is an aesthetic choice, a brand identity. For him, it was a traumatic reality. This establishes him as the authentic voice of the working class, and her as the imposter. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter as J.D. Vance closed the lifestyle tab of his leather folder. The audience was silent, still processing the image of the luxury apartment and the Tesla. They expected him to pivot back to hard economics, inflation, taxes, trade. Instead, Vance flipped to a tab labeled simply, Abuela. He looked at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with a gaze that wasn't angry, but deeply, unsettlingly disappointed. Congresswoman, Vance began, his voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute attention. We've talked about your policies. We've talked about your lifestyle. But there is one story that, to me, defines the difference between who you say you are and who you actually are. It's not about economics. It's about family. AOC stiffened visibly. She knew the reference immediately. Senator, if you bring my family into this, you brought them into it, Vance corrected gently. You posted it to 6 million people. He held up a printed screenshot of a tweet from June 2021. It showed a dilapidated home in Puerto Rico. The ceiling was sagging, water damage stained the walls, and blue tarps covered sections of the roof. It was a picture of genuine misery. On June 2, 2021, Vance narrated, "You posted these photos of your grandmother's home in Puerto Rico. You told the world that she was living in squalor. You blamed the Trump administration. You blamed the delay in Hurricane Maria relief funds. You used her suffering as the indictment of American imperialism and neglect." "That is correct," AOC said, her voice tight. "The aid was blocked. My grandmother, like thousands of others, was suffering because of bureaucratic cruelty. I was shining a light on injustice." "You shone a light," Vance agreed. "But what happened next is the part you leave out." He pulled up a second document. This one wasn't a tweet. It was a page from GoFundMe. "Americans saw that tweet," Vance said. "And they didn't see a political talking point. They saw an elderly woman living in a broken house. They saw a grandmother who needed help." Within hours, Vance continued, a conservative commentator named Matt Walsh, someone you despise, someone who disagrees with you on everything, organized a fundraising campaign. He didn't do it to mock you. He did it to prove a point, that Americans are generous. "Do you know how much they raised?" he asked. $104,153. In less than 48 hours. Thousands of people, Republicans, Democrats, people who had never voted in their lives, donated $10, $20, $50. They wanted to fix your grandmother's roof. They wanted to make sure she was safe. Vance turned back to AOC. "You had a check for $100,000 waiting for your family. It was enough to repair the house. It was enough to buy a new house. It was enough to change her life overnight. And you refused it." The gasp from the audience was audible. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath. AOC's face flushed a deep crimson. "That was a political stunt. It was organized by right-wing trolls who wanted to embarrass me. I wasn't going to let my family be used as a prop for their performative charity." "Performative charity," Vance repeated, testing the weight of the phrase. "Congresswoman, the money was real. The bank transfer was real. The roof repairs could have been real. You rejected $100,000 of actual help for your suffering grandmother because it came from the wrong people. You decided that your political pride was more important than her physical safety. My family handled it privately," AOC shouted, losing her composure for the first time. "We didn't need their money. We take care of our own." "Did you?" Vance asked. He held up a third document, a timeline. "Because I checked the record. After you rejected the money, the GoFundMe was refunded to the donors. And then, silence. You never posted an update? You never showed the repairs? There is no public record of that house being fixed in the months that followed. You used her suffering to score a political point against Trump on Twitter," Vance said, his voice rising slightly in intensity. "You got your headlines, you got your likes, you got your retweets, and when the cameras turned off and the money was offered to actually fix the problem, you walked away." "That isn't leadership," Vance said. "That is narcissism." AOC was shaking her head furiously. "You don't know my family. You don't know our dynamics. How dare you judge us? I judge you, Vance said, because I know what it's like to have a grandmother who saves you. The room went dead quiet. This was the moment Vance had been building toward. He wasn't just attacking her. He was contrasting her with himself. I wrote a book about my grandmother, Vance said softly. Mama, she was a tough woman. She carried a gun. She cursed. But when my mother was consumed by addiction, when my home was falling apart, she took me in. She saved my life. She gave me the stability I needed to become the man standing here today. If someone had offered me $100,000 to fix Mama's house, Vance said, his voice cracking with genuine emotion, I wouldn't have cared if it came from a Democrat, a Republican, or a Martian. I would have taken the money. I would have fixed the roof. I would have made sure she was warm and dry. Because I loved her more than I loved my political brand. He looked at AOC with a look of profound pity. You had the chance to show that humanity transcends ideology. You had the chance to show that we are Americans first, and partisans second. Instead, Vance concluded, you proved that for you, politics is the only religion. You sacrificed your grandmother's comfort on the altar of your own ego. AOC stood frozen. The accusation was too personal, too visceral to deflect with a slogan about systemic injustice. She looked small behind the podium. You claim to fight for the poor, Vance said, closing the tab. But when it came to your own blood, you chose the tweet over the roof. And if you won't even help your own grandmother when it contradicts your narrative, Vance asked the camera, why should Americans trust you to help them? Analytical expansion, moral prioritization. This section deconstructs the ethical framework of the candidate. The GoFundMe paradox. Vance uses the rejected donation to trap AOC in a moral dilemma. If she accepts the money, she legitimizes her political enemies. If she rejects it, she hurts her family. By choosing the latter, she proves Vance's central thesis, that her ideology is more important to her than tangible results. The mama contrast. By invoking his own grandmother, Vance grounds the attack in personal experience. It stops being a cheap shot and becomes a testimony of values. He positions himself as a protector of family, while painting her as a protector of her brand. This appeals to the universal value of filial piety. The prop accusation. Vance turns AOC's own tactic against her. She accused Trump of neglecting Puerto Rico. Vance accuses her of neglecting her grandmother. He argues that she used the woman as a prop for sympathy, but discarded her when the solution, money from conservatives, didn't fit the script. The emotional weight of the grandmother story hung in the air like smoke. Vance let it linger for a moment before shifting gears. He needed to move from the personal to the professional. He needed to prove that her failure to help her family was mirrored by her failure to help her country. Let's turn to the next tab, Vance said, his voice returning to a clinical professional tone. Record. Congresswoman, you have been in the United States House of Representatives since January 2019. That is 6 years. You are not a freshman anymore. You are a senior member of the Democratic caucus. You have tenure. You have a staff. You have a budget. Vance opened a spreadsheet filled with legislative data. In 6 years, Vance said, you have given hundreds of speeches. You have appeared on every late-night talk show. You have been on the cover of Vanity Fair and GQ. You have built one of the largest social media followings in the history of American politics, nearly 14 million followers. But I checked the Library of Congress database, Vance said. Do you know how many bills, major pieces of legislation sponsored by you, have been signed into law? He held up a hand, forming a zero. Zero. Not one. In 6 years. AOC bristled. That is a distortion. I have co-sponsored hundreds of bills. I have passed amendments. I have shifted the Overton window. The Overton window doesn't pave roads, Vance shot back. And co-sponsoring a bill is like liking a tweet. It requires no work. It requires no negotiation. It is a signal, not an accomplishment. Let's look at your clique, Vance continued. The squad. You, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley. Between you, you have dozens of years of service. You have the loudest microphones in the party. And yet, Vance said, not a single major policy initiative from the squad has become federal law. Not the Green New Deal. Not Medicare for all. Not the cancellation of student debt. Why? Vance asked. Because you don't know how to legislate. You only know how to agitate. He pulled out a transcript of a vote from 2021. Let's talk about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Vance said. This was the biggest investment in American infrastructure in 50 years. Roads, bridges, clean water pipes, rural broadband. It was a bill negotiated by President Biden, your own party leader. It passed the Senate with Republican votes. It was a moment of unity. You voted no, the audience murmured. Many had forgotten this detail. You voted against rebuilding the roads in your own district, Vance said. You voted against removing lead pipes from schools in the Bronx. Why? AOC leaned into the microphone. Because it was a corporate giveaway. It privatized public assets. It didn't go far enough on climate. I refuse to sell out my values for a watered-down compromise. Compromise is the job, Vance shouted, his voice echoing off the studio walls. That is what a legislator does. You sit in a room with people you disagree with, and you find a way to move the ball forward. You don't get 100% of what you want. You get 60%, and you come back tomorrow for the rest. But you, Vance said, pointing a finger, you prefer 0%. You would rather have the issue than the solution. You voted no on infrastructure because it let you go on Twitter and say you held the line. Meanwhile, the potholes in Queens stayed unfilled. Even Nancy Pelosi knows it, Vance said. He pulled up a quote. The former Speaker of the House, the woman who led your party for decades. Do you remember what she called the Green New Deal? Vance read the quote with a dry smile. The Green Dream, or whatever. That is disdain, Congresswoman. That is your own leadership telling you that you are not serious. Chuck Schumer ignores you. The White House manages you like a problem, not a partner. You are not a leader in the Democratic Party, Vance said brutally. You are a mascot. You exist to raise money and generate headlines. But when the adults get in the room to actually write the laws, the door is closed to you. AOC's face was a mask of fury. I am building a movement. We are changing the consciousness of a generation. We are holding powerful people accountable. You are holding them accountable on TikTok, Vance replied. But in the United States Code, where the laws are written, you are invisible. There is a ratio in Washington, he said, the ratio of fame to effectiveness. Usually, the most effective legislators are the quiet ones. They are in committee hearings. They are marking up bills. They are building coalitions. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has the highest fame in Congress and the lowest effectiveness rating according to the Center for Effective Lawmaking. She was ranked the 230th most effective Democrat out of 240. That is almost last place. She is an influencer, Vance concluded. She is not a lawmaker. And if you re-elect her, you are electing a celebrity who will continue to give you nothing but content. Analytical expansion, legislative efficacy. This section attacks the professional competence of the candidate. The scorecard. Vance uses the Center for Effective Lawmaking ranking as an objective metric. By citing her rank, 230 out of 240, He moves the debate from ideology to performance. It's hard to argue you are a revolutionary leader when you are statistically the least effective person in the room. Performance versus governance. The attack on her infrastructure vote is crucial. It frames her as an obstructionist. Vance argues that her pursuit of ideological purity actually hurts her constituents. No new roads, no clean water. He positions compromise as a virtue of governance and purity as a vice of vanity. The mascot label, calling her a mascot, is a diminishing tactic. It suggests she is kept around by the party for branding purposes, but is excluded from actual power. It portrays her not as a threat to the establishment, but as a tool of it, a distraction to keep the youth vote engaged while the adults run the country. So you have no laws, Vance said. You have no results in Washington. But surely, if you are a community organizer at heart, things must be better back home. He flipped to the final tab. District Impact. Let's look at New York's 14th District, the Bronx and Queens. You promised a revolution, Vance said. Let's check the scoreboard. He pulled out a series of large, mounted photographs. These weren't charts. They were pictures of street corners in her district. Photo 1, Roosevelt Avenue. The image showed storefronts covered in plywood, graffiti, and trash piled on the curb. Since you took office in 2019, Vance said, small business closures in your district have outpaced the national average. Vacancy rates are up. Photo 2, a NYCHA housing complex. The image showed peeling lead paint, broken elevators, and mold. You voted no on the funding that would have fixed this, Vance reminded her, because the bill wasn't perfect, so the mold stayed. Photo 3, a help wanted sign. Unemployment in your district remains stubbornly high, especially among young men of color, the very demographic you claim to champion. Vance set the photos down and picked up a ledger. Median rent. Since 2019, the median rent in your district has increased by 30%. Gentrification has accelerated. The working-class families you talk about are being pushed out because you killed the supply of good jobs. He circled back to the Amazon argument, but this time he made it local. We talked about the Amazon deal earlier, Vance said, but let's look at the human cost. I spoke to a man named Marcus Rodriguez, Vance said. He owns a small catering company in Long Island City. He had taken out a loan to expand his kitchen. He was preparing to serve lunch to the 25,000 new workers Amazon was bringing. He hired 5 new staff members. When you killed the deal, Vance said, his contract vanished. He had to fire those 5 people. He defaulted on his loan. He almost lost his home. He isn't a billionaire, Congresswoman. He isn't Jeff Bezos. He is a Latino small business owner trying to achieve the American dream. You crushed him. You crushed him so you could have a viral moment on Twitter. AOC looked shaken. The mention of a specific constituent name, Marcus Rodriguez, grounded the attack in reality. I fight for small businesses every day, she stammered. We passed the PPP loans. You voted for lockdowns that destroyed them, Vance interrupted. And you chased away the biggest economic stimulus your district has ever seen. Vance leaned over the podium. Here is the truth, Congresswoman. You don't represent the Bronx. You represent the Internet. Your constituency isn't the grandmother in Queens waiting for the elevator to be fixed. Your constituency is the college student in Berkeley, the activist in Portland, the journalist in Brooklyn. You perform for them. And the people who actually live in your district, the ones who need safe streets, good jobs, and lower rent, they are just the backdrop for your content. You said you wanted to change Washington, Vance said, his voice dropping to a final, somber note. Instead, Washington changed you. You became a celebrity. and your district became a prop. Vance closed the folder. The sound was final. The plastic cover reflected the studio lights. "This is the ledger of decline," Vance said. "Fame for you, failure for them. And no amount of Instagram live videos can fix a pothole." Analytical expansion, local accountability. This section focuses on the constituent disconnect, the internet representative. Vance's most cutting insight is that AOC represents a digital constituency rather than a geographic one. By arguing that she performs for activists in other states, Berkeley, Portland, rather than her own voters, he paints her as a carpetbagger of the digital age. The human cost. The story of Marcus Rodriguez, the caterer, personalizes the macroeconomic failure of the Amazon deal. It moves the debate from billions of dollars to one man's livelihood. It creates a victim of her ideology. The gentrification paradox. Vance points out the irony that the champion of the poor has presided over massive rent hikes and displacement. He links this to her rejection of economic development, Amazon, arguing that by killing jobs, she weakened the community's ability to stay, accelerating the very gentrification she claims to fight. The debate ended not with a bang, but with a stunned silence. Lester Holt looked at the clock. "That concludes our debate," he said, his voice sounding thin in the heavy air. "Thank you to our candidates." Usually, when a debate ends, the candidates rush to center stage to shake hands, smiling for the photo op. Not tonight. J.D. Vance simply picked up his leather folder, buttoned his jacket, and nodded once to the moderator. He walked off stage right, his movement efficient and undramatic. AOC stood frozen behind her podium. Her smile was gone. Her posture, usually so upright and defiant, seemed to have collapsed inward. She looked at the empty space where Vance had stood, as if trying to understand what had just happened. She had prepared for a shouting match. She had been dismantled by a spreadsheet. The cameras panned across the audience. There was no applause, just the quiet shuffling of people who felt like they had witnessed a car crash in slow motion. The verdict. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes, the clips hit the internet. But it wasn't the sound bites AOC's team had hoped for. Vance debate trended #1 globally. The clip of the Amazon math on the whiteboard hit 10 million views in an hour. The clip of the grandmother's GoFundMe hit 15 million. The segment about the Met Gala dress was played on every evening news broadcast. NBC's overnight snap poll dropped like a bomb the next morning. Who won the debate? Vance, 71%. Ocasio-Cortez, 19%. Tie, 10%. It was a massacre. Among independent voters, the margin was even wider. The media shift. Even the media, usually sympathetic to AOC, couldn't spin it. The New York Times headline read, "Reality Bites. Vance uses data to dismantle the progressive icon." CNN ran a segment titled, "The End of the Vibes Election? Vance Brings Receipts." Late-night comedians tried to crack jokes, but the audience didn't laugh. It was too brutal. It felt like watching a bully get punched in the nose. Shocking, but undeniably final. Fact-checkers scrambled to find errors in Vance's numbers. They found none. The Amazon math checked out. The legislative record checked out. The grandmother's GoFundMe was real. The rent prices were accurate. The political consequence. The impact on AOC was devastating. The squad went quiet. Their social media engagement, usually a torrent of activity, slowed to a trickle. Other Democrats began to distance themselves. In her district, the mood shifted from adoration to skepticism. The spell was broken. A primary challenger emerged. Marcus Rodriguez, the very catering owner Vance had mentioned, or a fictionalized version of him representing the business community, announced his candidacy. His slogan was simple: Results over retweets. His first campaign ad was just a clip of Vance saying, "She killed the jobs. We're still paying for it." AOC returned to Congress, but she was different, quieter, more careful. The clapback queen had been silenced. She stopped picking fights she couldn't win. She started attending committee hearings. She tried to pass a bill renaming a post office, her first legislative win in 7 years. The cultural shift. But the debate meant more than just one election. It signaled a shift in the culture. For a decade, American politics had been dominated by the influencer politician, the candidate who prioritized viral moments, emotional storytelling, and aesthetic signaling over governance. J.D. Vance, with his worn leather folder and his monotone delivery, had pierced that bubble. He proved that competence is a weapon. He proved that math is the ultimate counter-argument to morality. He became the anti-influencer. Universities began teaching the debate in rhetoric classes. Political consultants studied the tape. The era of performance politics began to wane, replaced by a hunger for receipts. The final scene. 6 months later, J.D. Vance was walking through the Capitol Rotunda. A young reporter, fresh out of journalism school, ran up to him. "Senator Vance," she asked, "do you think you were too hard on her? Some people say it was cruel." Vance stopped. He looked at the reporter, then looked up at the dome of the Capitol. "Politics isn't a game," Vance said quietly. "It isn't a TV show. It isn't a Twitter feed. When you get it wrong, people lose their jobs. Families lose their homes. Grandmothers live under tarp roofs." He adjusted his folder, the same worn leather one. "Cruelty," Vance said, "is lying to people about what is possible. Cruelty is selling them a fantasy that destroys their reality." "I didn't destroy her," Vance concluded, walking away. "The truth did. And reality," he called back over his shoulder, "always wins in the end." Analytical expansion, the triumph of substance. The conclusion synthesizes the narrative into a thesis on political epistemology. The death of the influencer. The narrative posits that the AOC era of politics, defined by style, youth, and digital fluency, has a hard ceiling. It hits that ceiling when it encounters the real. Vance represents the reemergence of the real: data, logistics, consequences. The competence pivot. The 71% poll number suggests that voters are exhausted by polarization and are craving competence. They don't want a fighter. They want a mechanic. Vance wins not because he is more charismatic, but because he seems like he knows how the machine works. Truth as the ultimate weapon. The final line, "Reality always wins," is the philosophical core. Narratives can be spun, but eventually the math has to balance. The rent has to be paid. The road has to be built. The story suggests that any political movement not grounded in objective reality is doomed to collapse when challenged by someone who is.